Hello, exhausted listener. Today we are going to discuss a light, sweet and fluffy topic, having children in the Middle Ages. A magical experience, full of love, care and safety. Just kidding. If you think medieval parenting was a romantic version of The Little Mermaid amidst a wheat harvest, I hate to inform you, but it was more like a horror movie with a soundtrack of colic screams. You are pregnant, and not in a cute way, with black and white photos holding your belly. You are pregnant in a wooden hut that smells of mold, sweat and fear. There is no prenatal care, no ultrasound, just back pain, constant nausea, and a 60-year-old woman who swears she knows what she's doing because she once helped deliver a goat. Spoiler. It is not the same thing, but before we continue, get comfortable. Seriously, fix that pillow, wrap yourself in the blanket like a tired larva, and let my boring voice do the rest. And oh, before boredom embraces you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Otherwise, YouTube will bury this channel, thinking nobody cares about lice, feces and traumatic births at 2 a.m. And perhaps they are right, but since you are already here, help us out. There is always a new, equally unnecessary story waiting for you for another night of almost sleep. And comment where you are listening from and why you are still awake. Morbid curiosity. Now turn off the light because darkness suits medieval maternity. Literally, there was no electricity. Let's begin. You are pregnant. Or rather, you were informed that you are pregnant because back then, nobody took a pharmacy test. There was no suspicion nor waiting for the first 3 months. You felt nauseous. Your period stopped. A medieval priest appears out of nowhere with a crucifix and a prayer prescription. And if you think you're going to have a special announcement moment with colorful cupcakes, forget it. The gender reveal party is just the midwife opening her mouth after the birth and saying, "It came out whole," or almost. By the way, pay the midwife. This woman will become the most important person in your life for about 15 minutes until you faint from pain and are forgotten by everyone, including history. In the Middle Ages, women did not give birth in hospitals. They gave birth wherever they could, with their legs propped up on an old basin surrounded by other women, and sometimes a chicken that nobody bothered to shoo away. If there was a bed, great. If there was a floor, that worked too. The important thing was to scream, bleed, and hope the child didn't be born with a tail. Because yes, it was believed that deformities were divine punishments. And of course, if you thought at least there was anesthesia, the answer is bad wine and biting down on a piece of leather. That was it, nothing more. Constant pain, chances of survival lower than winning the lottery without playing. Childbirth in the Middle Ages was like a duel with death, but without a sword, without an audience, and with more blood. If by some medieval miracle you survived, congratulations, you are temporarily alive. Now there is a naked baby crying, wrapped in a cloth that was likely used in the harvest yesterday. There are no diapers, no ointment, no pediatrician. What is there? Milk. That is, if you have milk. If you don't, patience. Someone will invent a brilliant solution, like giving diluted wine or turnip water porridge, which is basically a poetic way of saying, "Good luck, baby." And you know that modern moment when the newborn is placed on the mother's chest with soft background music and a sepia filter? Well, in the Middle Ages, the filter was the smell of sweat, mold, and the body still shedding what remained of the unpleasant party that was childbirth. And the umbilical cord had no alcohol, no clamps. It was cut with whatever was sharp, and in the end still received a brand from a red-hot iron because apparently pain was never enough. Trauma with a scent of burning. The baby cried a lot, and this was seen as a sign of life or demonic possession. Yes, if the child cried too much or looked strange, some families called the priest to perform an exorcism. Others just accepted it was bad luck. Good luck, medieval child. You've already started suspicious. Now let's talk about health, or the absence of it. Babies in the Middle Ages had a higher chance of dying than completing their first month of life. Most didn't even receive a name before a few weeks. Do you know why? Because naming a child who might die tomorrow was seen as unnecessary attachment. That's right. Your birth certificate was, "Let's wait and see if it survives." And you think it's bad because your mother didn't throw a baby shower, the place where the baby slept, in the middle of the bed, literally between the parents, the fleas, the dust, and sometimes the house cat. A cradle was a rich person's thing. A blanket, well, only if there was leftover fabric. And if the child coughed, it was the beginning of the end, because the flu killed, fever killed, teething killed. And sometimes just being born was already too much for the fragile little body that hadn't had the chance to see a full sun. But relax, if they survived the first years, then the suffering really began. Because now the baby became a medieval child who worked, who got beaten, who had no toys, but knew how to plant onions at 4 years old. You survived childbirth, almost fainted from pain, lost more blood than any human body should lose, and now you're holding a baby, trembling, red, and looking like someone who also doesn't understand how they ended up here. Welcome to medieval motherhood. Spoiler not strictly used, but present. It won't get better. The baby is alive for now because in the first days, everything that can kill it is lurking. Cold, hunger, fungus, hexes, the evil eye. And the neighbor who thinks a child crying too much is the devil's work. Yes, this is the level of science available. First mission, keep the baby warm. But not warm like cotton swaddles with a gas heater. Warm like wrapped in an old cloth, smelling of onions, breastfeeding under a leaking roof, with wind entering through cracks in the wall and a rat watching from the beam. It's what we have. The baby's clothes, a rag tied with rope, literally. A medieval baby didn't wear an outfit of the day, they wore bindings. Swaddling was the custom. You wrapped the child like a burrito with zero mobility, in the hope that this would prevent the soul from escaping or the spine from twisting, or both. Preventive medicine, 11th century version. You think, but at least there are diapers. No, there aren't. What is there? It's cloth. A cloth that will be used, reused, dried by the fire, put back on until it disintegrates. Sometimes not even that. There are babies who just go naked on top of straw. The straw is the sheet, the diaper and the cradle, all at the same time. And if it gets wet, it happens. If it dried, it's good as new. And the bath? Ah, the bath. What a bold concept. You yourself haven't taken one yet. And the baby, poor thing, will only touch real water when they are about 2 months old. Maybe. Because water is cold, carrying buckets is annoying, and according to doctors of the time, too much bathing weakens the body, opens the pores, they say, lets the disease in, they swear. So no bath, just a damp cloth and faith. Breastfeeding, of course, if you have milk, because if you don't, the child will be fed whatever liquid is nearby. Goat's milk, thin porridge, weak beer, yes, beer. After all, pure water is a thing for modern dreamers. And if none of this works, you hand the baby to a wet nurse. That is, if you are rich. If you are poor, pray. And the wet nurse? Well, she probably already has 3 children, lives in the same house with chickens on the floor and has been coughing for weeks. But believe me, she is the most stable option available. And let's not even get into what happens if the baby is born with something outside the standard. An extra finger, a slightly more closed eye, a spot on the skin. This could be a sign that they were swapped for a changeling, a fairy baby. Result, either they threw coarse salt or left him in the current of rumors of the time. That famous, if it's from the fairies, it will leave on its own. Medieval logic, don't ask me. Yes, it was really like that. And no, nobody saw a problem with it. Now that the child is alive, tied up and fed with whatever was available, it is time to protect it from life. Because there is something called baptism, which basically serves to say to God, look, we tried, but if it is to die, Let it die saved. The ceremony happens in the first days, when the baby barely knows how to breathe. It is quick, freezing, and full of superstition. It isn't about faith, it's about statistics. Half of the children die before age 5. So baptize quickly before he sneezes. And postpartum. Of course, you, the mother, continue bleeding with a fever, without rest. But now with a baby lying on your chest and everyone thinking you should already be standing up cooking porridge for the family. Because rest is for queens, and even queens don't rest. You cry, but in silence, because if you complain, they say it is spiritual weakness. If you ask for help, they will laugh. And if you have any postpartum crisis, they will call the priest, because everything that isn't understood in the Middle Ages is a demon, and nobody wants to risk an exorcism just because they are sad. And congratulations again. Now you are officially a child factory. The expectation is that you have at least some 5. That is, if they don't all die before learning to walk. Then you try again. But calm down, breathe, close your eyes. The baby is there. You too, both alive for now. The baby survived the first days. Miracle, perhaps. Selective negligence of death, probable. But now he breathes, nurses, and makes noise. A lot of noise. And you officially enter the longest phase of medieval motherhood, surviving the surviving child. And before you think about creating a routine, let me warn you, that concept does not exist. There is no pediatrician on WhatsApp, nor sleep monitoring app. What exists is an endless sequence of poorly done tasks, interrupted sleep, and the certainty that you are doing everything wrong, but just like everyone else. By day, the baby cries, by night too, and you have no idea if he is hungry, cold, having a spiritual collapse, or if it is just a tooth growing in crooked. Because teeth in the Middle Ages were serious business. There were people who thought that the first teething could kill, and sometimes it really did. Not because of the tooth itself, but because the fever came with it. And fever without antipyretics was basically a winning ticket to the beyond. To alleviate the baby's suffering, the solutions are simple and almost always wrong. Rubbing pig fat on the gums, making nettle tea, blowing smoke from dried herbs into the ear, or just ignoring it and hoping time resolves it. And spoiler, time does not resolve it. Time only passes and hurts. And while the baby screams, you try to do everything at the same time. Cook, sew, take care of other children who also scream. And all this inside a house that technically is not a house. It is a room without a window, without privacy, with more smell than space. The cradle, a basket on the floor. The floor, beaten earth with some emotional mud mixed in. The father helps, sure. When he isn't in the field or drinking or trying not to die of tetanus, he might appear to take a quick look. Maybe say the baby looks like him. Maybe ask if there is food, but help for real. Only if the Black Death takes both grandparents and he is left by elimination. Meanwhile, the baby continues growing in fits and starts. Literally, he starts crawling, tripping, falling. There is no fluffy rug, no corner protector. There are stones, thorns, embers, and chicken poop. Learning to walk is basically an obstacle course full of infection risks. And the diet, breastfeeding, goes as far as possible. Afterward, weaning is done with food that shouldn't be food even for adults. Turnip purees, onion broth, bread soaked in beer. That's right. Is bread with beer nutritious? No, but it's what we have. And sometimes what we have also has larvae. You pick them out with your finger and continue. Diseases keep prowling, diarrhea, vomiting, coughing, spots, and you try to cure with what you have. Leaves, ashes, tree bark broth. If nothing works, call the healer. She will spit 3 times on the baby, tie a wolf's tooth around his neck, and say he is now protected. And incredibly, sometimes he gets better, probably coincidence. But just in case, you continue. Because stopping is not an option. The child will still grow more, will walk, will run, will hurt their knee, will eat mud, will fall from the apple tree branch, and you will be there watching, tired, fed up, but alive. Ah, and don't forget, none of this is considered enough. Being a mother in the Middle Ages is a divine obligation. You don't get merit for it. You don't become a saint. At most, you get another child before the next winter. So you keep nursing, cleaning, whispering prayers while the baby sleeps, hoping he doesn't cough. And if he coughs, praying it doesn't turn into a fever. And if it turns into a fever, praying it doesn't turn into a wake. And if he smiles, one of those toothless smiles illuminated by a crooked candle, you even think it's worth it. But then he vomits on your foot, and you remember you have to clean that with a rag that will later serve as a diaper. And that's it. Good luck. Let's talk about clean things. Lie. There aren't any. In the Middle Ages, hygiene was more of an abstract concept than a real practice. The word cleanliness existed, but rarely found practical application outside the mouths of religious people who believed more in the purity of the soul than the body. And you, with a newborn baby and a body in tatters, are at the center of this aromatic mess. Let's start with you. Postpartum, the recommendation would be rest, warm baths, and medical monitoring. But guess what? You get half a bowl of broth and "it will pass" as a diagnosis. If you are bleeding too much, the explanation is simple: sin. And if you have a fever, it is probably bad air entering through the pores. That is when someone doesn't suggest it is divine punishment for not having prayed enough during labor. Your body hurts, smells strange, and continues functioning by force. But it's fine, because everyone expects you to return to work in, 2 days, because medieval time stops for no one, not even for those who just gave birth. And the baby? Well, the baby also lives in this same parallel universe where soap is a luxury item and bathing is an urban legend. He is lying on a cloth that was once a floor cloth and then a dishcloth and has now turned into a sheet. And yet it is the good cloth. His bath is rare, lukewarm and fast, and not because someone wanted to be gentle, but because heating water takes work and spending water on bathing is almost a sin. After all, you have to save it to cook, give to the cattle, wash the father's pee bucket, and if there is any left over, think about a bath. And spoiler, there isn't any left over. When you decide to give a bath, it is more of a symbolic ritual. A damp cloth, a quick wipe over the face, and the most dramatic folds. And presto, clean baby, according to medieval standards. The remaining dirt is considered a natural part of development. Now let's talk about what really keeps you up at night: diseases. The list is long. Prevention is zero. And the cure is always a mixture of hope, herbs, and resignation. The baby sneezed, you already light a candle. Cough. Maybe it is flu or pneumonia or plague or a curse inherited from a great-grandfather who stole wheat. High fever. You tie a piece of fabric with rue leaves on the forehead and hope he doesn't become delirious. If he becomes delirious, it's another level. Call the healer, the priest, the gossiping neighbor, and everyone who has some miraculous sympathy. Diarrhea is common. Contaminated water, spoiled food, and the simple fact of living in an environment where the chicken craps in the same corner where you make porridge. There are no disposable diapers, only old rags, and if the child is lucky, maybe they get changed before lunch. If not, they go on fermenting right there. Diaper rash, of course. But you only notice when the crying changes tone. The ointment is animal fat, mixed with some plant the grandmother used and said was good. It works sometimes. Or maybe the baby just accepts suffering as part of existence. Ah, and bites, because the baby is not alone. Ticks, fleas, bedbugs, and a whole medieval fauna live with him and with you. The itching is constant, insomnia too. The night is a duet, the baby crying from colic, and you trying to swat mosquitoes with what remains of your sanity. And the more serious diseases, Well, the truth is that many people simply didn't know what was what. Cholera, tetanus, scarlet fever, dysentery, everything was bad fever, and the treatment was always the same. Little tea, blessing, fasting, prayer. If they survived, it was a miracle. If not, it was destiny. At least he was baptized, they said. And while all this happens, you continue living. Because living in this context is a passive verb. You don't live. You are lived by events. You survive between a diaper rash and a scare. Sleep badly, eat worse, and pray that by some flaw in the divine system, your baby passes age 5. Because if he passes, the chances of staying alive increase a little, and you go from rag to rag, from cough to cough, from hope to hope. And even without knowing, you are raising a human being inside a reality where everything, absolutely everything, conspires against survival. But you are there together, sweaty, dirty, smelly, but alive for now. Raising a child in the Middle Ages wasn't just dealing with disease, dirt, and scarce milk. It was also navigating a sea of beliefs, social judgments, and fears that would make even Google refuse to answer. You think, at least there are other mothers nearby. Yes, there are. But that doesn't mean support. It means collective judgment, sharing of bizarre recipes, and a silent competition over whose baby survived the longest without vomiting blood. Because yes, socially being a mother was a public function. Your belly was observed by the whole village. Your childbirth was commented on by the midwife, by the neighbor's great aunt, and by that old man who lives leaning against the well and has an opinion on everything. Everyone knows how many hours it lasted, if you screamed a lot, and if the baby came out beautiful, which in practice means born with a baby face and not a goat face. If it was born with a goat face, then it gets complicated, because one of the greatest terrors of medieval motherhood was the fear of the changeling. According to European folklore, fairies, yes, fairies, stole human babies and left a substitute in their place. A strange, crying, sick baby, sometimes too silent, other times with a look too knowing for his age. Result, various real children were neglected, abandoned, or even assaulted by families who believed they were dealing with an infiltrated magical being. The diagnosis? This child is not mine. The solution? Make noise, pass the baby through fire smoke, because apparently smoking served even for children, or leave a little salt strategically at the door to see if the fairies returned the original. Yes, it was real, and no, it wasn't an exception. This was part of how the unknown was treated. Any physical or behavioral difference could be seen as a sign of supernatural intervention. If the baby took too long to walk, curse. If he took too long to talk, work of the devil. If he spoke too early, witchcraft. And if he laughed alone, yikes. It was better to hide the child until someone decided he had returned to normal. And speaking of witchcraft, be careful with who sees you caring for your baby with too much zeal. A mother who is too protective could raise suspicions. A mother who used different herbs to make tea could be accused of sorcery. A mother who didn't baptize her son quickly had a pact. So you spend the whole day balancing between the fear of losing the baby to a disease and the fear of being accused of having made the baby sick. It is a constant game of guilt, distrust, and collective superstition. Shared paranoia, 14th century edition. And if by chance the baby dies, which unfortunately was common, the fault is yours. Because you didn't pray enough. Because you didn't cover him properly. Because you gave sour milk. Because you let him sleep facing the wrong side of the moon. Or just because God wanted it. But still, the fault is yours. Social life revolves around this. Women's conversations in the field about how a baby was cured after they tied garlic to his navel. Little gossip in the line at the well about that child who still hasn't spoken and who has a strange look. Improvised meetings with the midwife to see who softened the fontanelle with more competence. And of course, religious festivals, the only moment the community gathers for something other than suffering. You go to mass with your baby, tied to your body, using the least filthy cloth, hoping he doesn't cough during the blessing, otherwise someone will whisper, "He's sick," and you spend the entire week being watched. Toys? No. The child's toy is an old spoon, a chicken bone, or a piece of wood full of chances to cause a problem. Infant socialization was like this. Little humans imitating adults while hoping not to trip into embers. And you, mother, live in this cycle between praying not to be judged, praying for the child not to be cursed, and hoping nobody appears with the brilliant idea that the cure for everything is dipping the baby in a tub of urine. Yes, that was also a valid suggestion at the time, because apparently common sense was only invented in the 19th century. So, if you are raising a child in the middle of the Middle Ages, congratulations, you are not only facing the physical chaos of the real world, but also the emotional labyrinth of collective mystic fear. And the most curious thing, nobody finds this strange. It's just life. And you thinking your mother-in-law's visit was hard? Your baby grew up. Congratulations. He survived the phase where sneezing could be considered a death sentence. Now, at some 3 or 4 years old, he can finally fulfill the great medieval dream. Start working. Because childhood in the Middle Ages was not synonymous with parks, daycare, or Sesame Street. It was synonymous with utility. The child only starts to exist socially when he is capable of carrying something, shoeing chickens, or at least not dying of thirst alone. You look at that small being, dirty, with half his teeth still trying to come in and say, "Time to help." He doesn't understand, of course not. But he learns fast, because either he learns or he gets a scream from his grandmother with raw turnip breath. His routine no longer revolves around sleeping and nursing. Now it is about carrying buckets, gathering firewood, and picking lice off younger siblings. Yes, this is a common social activity, the circle of lice, a kind of family meeting where everyone sits, scratches, and combs themselves with an iron comb that hurts more than it resolves. And yet, the dance goes on. Education exists, but not as you know it. No colored pencils, playful activities, or early literacy. Learning happens on the basis of repetition, observation, and occasionally a scream of, "Not like that." This applies as much to kneading bread dough as to dealing with the house animals. And speaking of animals, they are the most frequent childhood playmates. A dog without a name, a pig that sometimes sleeps inside the house, and 2 chickens that peck in the same corner where the child pees. This forms the family nucleus of the medieval pedagogical experience. Playing actually exists, but it is what it is. You play with what you have. A piece of wood becomes a horse, a bone becomes a sword, a fruit pit becomes a magic stone. And when there is nothing, the child just runs in circles until hitting something or falling in the mud. Fun has a short expiration date and ends with a scrape or an ear pull. You as a mother supervise from afar, but supervising here means trying to keep the youngest baby alive while the other climbs a dry tree and the oldest tries to light a fire alone. You only intervene if you smell burning or hear a cry that doesn't sound like whining. And when the child does something wrong, like knocking over a bucket of milk, for example, there is no conversation. There is no, "Let's reflect on this behavior." There is a scolding, maybe a slap and a vague threat, like, "If you keep this up, you'll turn into a beast." It is not known what beast, but the child believes it, and it works. At around 5 or 6 years old, if you are a girl, reality already begins to draw itself very clearly. Learn to spin wool, sew, wash, and help take care of younger siblings. If you are a boy, learn to use tools, feed the cattle, and carry things that technically should be lifted by adults with healthy spines. But a healthy spine is a myth. Nobody has one. The expectation is clear. Become an adult as fast as possible, because the sooner you help, the less burden for the rest of the house. And the less burden, the more chance of surviving the next winter. And of course there is the terror of external fear. You teach your children to be afraid of strangers, but not with that modern don't accept candy thing. Here the talk is direct. If you meet a man in black clothes and a book, run. It could be a tax collector or an inquisitor. Besides that, teach not to look too much at anyone, especially nobles, because making eye contact with someone who has more money is asking to get a smack or be accused of theft. And incredibly, amidst all this, the child still laughs, runs, screams, gets dirty, makes mud balls, shows a crooked tooth with pride, and you look from afar, tired, full of fleas and existential doubts, and think, well, at least he's alive. Boom, and yes, there is still no bath, but the mud covers the previous dirt, which in medieval logic already counts as hygiene. That's it. Your son grew up, and now you have one more pair of hands working in the infinite routine of being born, surviving, repeating. There is no diploma, no party, no happy birthday. There is only a tablespoon of hope and a new task. Tomorrow early, your child already walks, already speaks some crooked words, and is already able to complain of hunger. Great. Welcome to the second phase of suffering, feeding a child in the Middle Ages. You think you will give baby food, nutritious soup, a little fruit for an afternoon snack? Forget it here. The children's menu is exactly equal to the adult menu. Hard bread, thin broth, and if lucky, an onion. The child's breakfast? A piece of stale bread dipped in weak beer. Yes, beer. Before you are shocked, remember the water is dirty, full of parasites, and beer, even weak, is safer. So, congratulations. Your 5-year-old child already has more of an alcohol history than many university students today. Lunch, the same hard bread, perhaps with a vegetable broth. If you planted something and didn't die of hunger before the harvest. Meat only at a religious festival, or if some house animal died by accident, then yes, an improvised banquet. Otherwise, it is turnip broth again. And fruit? Yes, fruit exists, but if an apple appears, it is easier for it to become currency than a child's snack. You don't give an apple to your son to eat. You keep it to trade for salt, cloth, or dubious medicine. The child learns early. Apple isn't dessert, it's a strategic resource. Now treats, you think, at least honey. Yes, honey exists, but only if there are bees nearby, if someone has the courage to mess with the hive, and if they don't prefer to sell the honey at the market. In short, your child will grow up without Nutella, without chocolate, and without candy. The maximum sweet he will see is a half-burnt bread with a thread of thinned honey, and dinner the same as always. Bread, broth, vegetable if there is any, and a little watered-down goat's milk. Meals are repetitive, boring, and almost always insufficient. But nobody complains, because complaining takes energy, and energy is a luxury. And here enters a charming detail. Everything tastes like smoke. The house has no chimney. Food is made on direct fire, and the result is a diet where every bite comes seasoned with soot. The baby nurses with the smell of smoke. The child chews with the taste of smoke. You breathe smoke. Basically, you live inside a barbecue grill without meat, but the worst isn't even the lack of variety, it is the lack of hygiene. There is no washed spoon, no individual plate. The child eats straight from the cauldron with the same spoon used by 10 people. Cold, flu, worms, transmitted in a chain at mealtimes. And speaking of worms, yes, the child will have them. Almost everyone has them, because food is poorly washed, water is contaminated, and hands rarely touch soap. The swollen bellies of children aren't cuteness, they are roundworms. And the cure, teas, prayers, and waiting for time to expel them on its own. Still, you insist, because feeding is loving. Even if it is hard bread soaked in watered-down beer, you blow on the hot broth, give it to their mouth, clean with the old cloth, and hope the child swallows without choking. And when he finally smiles with a dirty mouth and teeth already half-crooked, you think, yeah, he's growing well, even knowing that well here means didn't die yet. The medieval diet is simple. Either you eat what exists or you don't eat. And believe me, the child learns this lesson fast. After all, you can't be picky when lunch is always the same thing. And you go along, sharing the hard bread, sharing the broth, sharing the hunger. Because raising a son in the Middle Ages is this: sharing the little and laughing at nothing. For now, the child chews. The rest is a problem for the future. Your son is no longer just a small eater of hard bread. He grew up, runs, falls, gets up, and now begins to learn how one truly lives in the Middle Ages. Only learning here isn't with books, colored chalk and a blackboard. It is with life. And life in the Middle Ages is a cruel teacher with pedagogical methods equivalent to getting hit with a slipper without warning. You think, but what about school? It exists in theory, just not for you. School is a privilege of rich people, of boys, and preferably boys destined for the clergy. In other words, if you aren't noble and don't plan to become a priest, forget it. The most reading your son will see is a market sign with poorly made drawings of fish, bread, or wine. So, education is homemade. Learning to pray, learning to obey, learning to repeat what the elders do. A boy learns the father's trade, farming, carpentry, blacksmithing, if lucky. A girl learns the mother's, sewing, cooking, giving birth. Yes, giving birth is also programmatic content. Sooner or later, the lesson arrives, and there is no positive pedagogy. No, let's talk about your feelings. Learning is direct. Do it wrong, get scolded. Do it very wrong, get spanked. Do it too wrong, become an example story for others. It is called education by public embarrassment. Rules, many, but all based on fear. Don't touch the food before it's time. Don't speak to strangers, especially if they are knights or tax collectors. Don't cry loud, because crying calls bad things. And mainly, do not question elders, ever. Questioning is dangerous. Questioning is heresy. And heresy causes serious problems. Discipline is constant. Your son learns early to stay silent during Mass, to lower his head when a feudal lord passes, not to poke the neighbor in the well line. Any slip can result in punishment. And medieval punishment isn't going without dessert, especially because dessert doesn't exist. Punishment is kneeling on corn, carrying rocks, or going without food. A practical class in obedience. And in the middle of all this exists religion. Our religion. The medieval child's first alphabet is made of crosses and prayers. Before learning to count to 10, he already knows the Lord's Prayer. Before knowing how to differentiate days of the week, he already knows when it is Easter, Pentecost, and Saint So-and-so's Day. Because if there is something medieval society taught well, it was: everything is God's fault or the devil's. There is no middle ground. If the harvest went wrong, it is because someone sinned. If the child got sick, it is because evil entered through the window. If the cow didn't give milk, it is witchcraft. Everything needs an explanation, and none of them is scientific. And your son grows up in this environment, learning that the world is full of invisible forces, ready to punish whoever dares to laugh at the wrong time. And yet, he grows learning in practice, in pain, in fright. Learns to handle a knife before having motor coordination. Learns to mess with fire before knowing how to speak properly. Learns to respect the priest, even without understanding the Latin he speaks. Learns to survive in a world where information is power. And you have no power. You observe. Sometimes with pride, sometimes with fear, sometimes just with exhaustion. Because medieval childhood doesn't last, it slips through fingers. One day your son is small, the next he is half an adult, ready to work more, eat the same and demand less. And you know, no matter how much you teach, no matter how much you protect, the world is a tougher teacher than you. He will learn, the hard way, and you, tired, only hope that he won't be the next statistic of the phrase everyone repeats without emotion. Ah, he didn't make it. For now, he resists. You already noticed. Raising a child in the Middle Ages is less about educating and more about surviving fear. Because every day there is a new threat, real or imaginary, ready to transform your life into a collective nightmare. Let's start with the basic fear. Disease. You never know what will appear. Fever suddenly could be just fever, or could be bubonic plague starting discreetly. Diarrhea could be just spoiled food, or could be a month of agony until the child withers. And since you have no doctor, only a healer who spits on the ground, blows smoke and ties a ribbon on the child's arm, you stay in eternal uncertainty. Then comes the fear of the environment. Yes, of the very place where you live. Because your house has no decent door, nor solid wall, and the roof drips on top of the improvised cradle. At night, any noise becomes a threat. Wolf, thief, spirit, or just wind entering through the crack. But since nobody knows how to differentiate properly, every noise is guaranteed panic. And of course, social fear, because in the Middle Ages everyone watches everyone. Your son sneezed during Mass, side eyes, fell in the middle of the street and scraped his knee. They already say it is a sign of weakness, God's punishment. You give the wrong plant in tea, witchcraft. Don't take the baby to baptize on time, pact. Basically, anything you do can become gossip with the potential to turn into an accusation. But the most constant fear is that of sudden infant death, which today medicine tries to understand. But at that time was merely called God willed it. You put your baby to sleep, exhausted, and pray that he wakes up. Pray, because that is all you can do. And if he doesn't wake up, there is no investigation, nor exam, nor explanation. Only silence, hidden crying. And the phrase that echoes in the village, it was divine will. And as if that wasn't enough, there is spiritual fear. You have to protect your son not only from cold and hunger, but also from the invisible. Demons, fairies, the evil eye, lost souls. So you fill the child with amulets, a wolf's tooth on the neck, a piece of red cloth tied on the arm, a saint's medal bought at the market. All this to try to cheat destiny, with every hiccup an omen, with every cough an alert. With every side glance from the neighbor, a suspicion. Fear is the constant seasoning of medieval motherhood. And deep down you know, most children don't reach adulthood. The statistics are against you. There is no doctor, no vaccine, no antibiotic. There is only faith, superstition, and whatever luck allows. Raising a child here is not about planning the future. It is about praying that a future exists. And yet, you continue. Breastfeed, rock, sing a repetitive and dull lullaby, which serves not to calm, but to give you the illusion that you are doing something. You run your hand over your son's head, hope the fever goes down, hope the cough disappears, hope the night passes quickly. And when he finally falls asleep, you take a deep breath, close your eyes and think, at least today worked out, but tomorrow is another day. And in the Middle Ages, another day never comes alone. Your son is still small, but in the Middle Ages, small is no excuse. By some 6 or 7 years old, he is no longer seen as a lap child. Now he is labor, unpaid mini-adult, medieval version. While today you worry about an ergonomic backpack and school snacks, here the worry is simple. Can your son carry a bucket without spilling? Can he shoe sheep without getting lost? Can he not die crushed by a cart? If yes, congratulations, he is already useful. Adult life starts early. The boys follow the father, learning to plow the land, fix tools, or take care of the animals. And if the father isn't around because he died, because he drank too much, or because he simply didn't return from the field, the boy learns alone, getting beaten more by the hoe than using it. The girls follow you, learning to sweep the house, dirt over dirt, patch cloth that is no longer cloth, cook broth that barely has ingredients. Of course, helping to take care of younger siblings. At 7 years old, a girl can already be seen as a little mother in training. Female childhood lasts less than a piece of bread forgotten in the rain. And don't think this is optional. The whole village watches. A child without a function is seen as dead weight. If they don't work, they serve no purpose. So your son learns fast, learns to obey orders, learns to repeat the correct gesture, learns to do it wrong and gets scolded until he gets it right. And safety does not exist. The child climbs a tree to get a dry branch, messes with fire without gloves, cuts vegetables with a dull knife. The risk of accident is constant. A cut finger, a burn, a fall in the well, everything becomes a lesson. Learning or a funeral depends on the day. Play still exists, but it already mixes with work. Your son runs after the chickens. It is play, but it is also a chore. Picks up the stone in the river and throws it. It's fun, but also helps the family have material to fix the fence. In practice, any movement becomes service. And of course, religion comes always present. Little by little, your son learns that working is not just survival, it is spiritual duty. He who does not work does not eat, and he who does not obey sins. These are phrases repeated until they become absolute truth. Work is faith in motion. Rest is almost sin. The child's body grows crooked, tired, with hands already calloused. You look at him and think, he still looks small. But in the eyes of the Middle Ages, he is not. In the eyes of the village, he is already an adult in beta version. And you, mother? You feel a mix of relief and sadness. Relief because now he helps. Sadness because you know that modern moment of enjoying childhood will never exist. Childhood here is not enjoyed, it is cut short. Deep down, you know the sooner he adapts, the more chance he has to survive. So you encourage, even with a heavy heart, and when he trips carrying wood, you help him up and say, it's just like that because it is just like that. In the Middle Ages, childhood doesn't end. It simply doesn't begin. You think raising a child is just a matter of inside the house? Wrong. In the Middle Ages, the entire village raises your child along with you, and not in the cute way of a cooperative community, but in the controlling, gossiping, and judging way. Your son doesn't belong only to you. He is seen as an extension of the family, the village, and even the local faith. Any slip becomes a comment. If he ran naked in the river, shame. If he spoke too loud in mass, disrespect. If he fell and scraped his knee, weakness. Everything is observed, everything is evaluated, and socialization doesn't mean playing in the playground. It means accompanying adults in tasks and imitating what they do. The boys learn to converse in the field, exchanging few words about harvest, weather, and debt. The girls learn watching the mothers, repeating gestures in the kitchen and sewing until fingers hurt. Playing house is already a real house, with dirty pots and empty pots. Interaction with other children exists, of course, but it is also pragmatic. Together, they herd cattle, carry wood, fetch water at the well. The group forms not by affinity, but by necessity. A friend is someone who carries the bucket with you and doesn't let you fall in the mud. An enemy is someone who pushes and steals your wooden spoon. And don't forget the festivals. The child's social life also includes religious rituals and agricultural calendar celebrations. Long masses, endless processions, forced fasts. Your son learns early to stand for hours in silence, praying in Latin, without understanding a word. It's like bilingual education, only without ever learning the other language. At fairs, learning continues. Your son sees trades, bargains, arguments over a piece of dried meat, learns to recognize wheat measurements and to mistrust everyone who looks smarter. There is no playful activity. There is observing life and absorbing the general distrust of humanity. And of course, religion sets the tone always. Since small, your son is reminded that he was born a sinner, that he must obey the priests, and that the world is full of temptations. If he cries, it is the devil's fault. If he laughs loud, it can also be the devil's fault. Basically, everything has the devil's finger in it. Childhood is preparation to feel guilt full time. And you, in the middle of all this, still try to guarantee the minimum of affection. Give a lap when there is time left over. Sing a repetitive song. Tell a story of saints or monsters. But affection here is a luxury, not because you don't love your son, but because time, hunger, and fear don't let you. The result is a child who grows up looking at the world with precocious seriousness. At 8 years old, he already knows how to pray, work, mistrust, and obey. He already knows that crying solves nothing, that laughing can be dangerous, and that the future is uncertain. You look from afar and realize his social life is equal to yours. It just started earlier and will end the same way, in silence, in the field, working until one can't anymore. In the Middle Ages, child is not a category. It is just the first version of an adult in testing. And you, tired, accept it because you have no choice. Your son grew up a little, but continues fragile. And now arrives the moment that every father and mother in the Middle Ages fears, the illness. Because getting sick is not an exception, it is the rule. First comes the cough. You think, a cough passes. Only it doesn't. Cough can turn into pneumonia, can turn into tuberculosis, can turn into the child didn't make it. You wake up at dawn with him gasping and there is no syrup, there is no nebulizer, there is no 24-hour pharmacy. There is herb tea, prayer, and a warm cloth on the chest. And if it doesn't work, well, it didn't work. Then comes the fever. You put your hand on the forehead and feel the heat rising. Today you would give a Tylenol and wait for it to go down. There you only pray. Either call the midwife or call the priest. Sometimes call both, because one never knows if it is a physical or spiritual disease. It could be the evil eye, it could be punishment, it could be just life tired of holding on. And if it is diarrhea, welcome to the biggest medieval nightmare, without antibiotics, without oral hydration, without anything. The child loses water fast, the body withers, eyes sink. You try to give broth, try to give milk, try to give whatever you have, but often it doesn't help. More people die of dehydration than by the sword. The worst is that there is no diagnosis. Nobody knows what is what. Everything is just bad fever, a bad wind, bad eye. A strong cough could be flu, could be measles, could be plague. And in doubt, the standard explanation, God wanted it so. And the treatments, a wonder. There is a recipe for everything. Tying herbs on the forehead, putting garlic in the pocket, doing a fumigation with dung. Yes, dung. Because apparently the logic was, if it stinks enough, it cures. If the child has stomach pain, they give wine. Yes, wine. Because if even an adult forgets pain by drinking, the child should also forget. And if the baby cries a lot, sometimes they gave a little homemade medicine of those that make one sleep fast even too much. It worked, but the side effect could be never waking up again, and you, in the middle of this, balance between hope and despair. Spend sleepless nights listening to irregular breathing, praying for the fever to lower, wetting a cloth in water that isn't even that clean. Every different cry is panic, every long silence terror. But it is not just the body. Religion also mixes in. If the child gets sick, it is common to take him to the church, pass by the priest's blessing, touch a saint's relic, receive holy water. Sometimes he even gets better, sometimes not. Faith is the last resort and the first too. And when he doesn't get better, there isn't much to do. You cry hidden, because showing too much pain can also be seen as lack of faith. The whole village comments, the whole village judges, and in the end, it's just you looking at your son without knowing if the next sunrise will be his last chance to see the world. In the Middle Ages, getting sick is almost a sentence, and surviving is almost a miracle. And every time your son escapes, you feel a relief mixed with fear, because you know that the next winter, the next cough, the next dirty water can take him to the limit again, and you, tired, continue because you have no choice. Your son survived childhood. Just that is already a statistic to be celebrated. But be careful with the celebration, because the Middle Ages gives no truce. Now he reaches adolescence. And medieval adolescence has nothing of existential crisis in the bedroom, listening to sad music. It is just the phase of becoming an adult without rehearsal time. At 12, 13 years old, your son is already officially considered capable of assuming major responsibilities. Majority here does not mean driving a car or choosing a college. It means working like an adult, marrying like an adult, and dying like an adult. In short, the little childhood that remained is over. If it is a boy, life is already mapped out. Learn the father's trade, enter as an apprentice in some guild if from the city, or simply become another pair of arms in the field. He starts wearing clothes closer to those of adults, and in practice is already seen as a young man, even if he still has a squeaky voice and the face of a malnourished child. If it is a girl, the situation is even faster. At 12 years old, she can already be promised in marriage. Yes, 12. And no, it isn't an exception. You know this because it was probably the same with you. The girl, who still played with pieces of wood, now prepares to marry a man twice as old, have children, and repeat the cycle. Adolescence doesn't exist. It is just a shortcut to childbirth. And preparation starts early. Embroider better, cook better, stay in silence better. The body hasn't even finished growing, but society already demands full maturity. If the girl menstruates, ready, it's over. It's not just became a young lady, it is became a potential wife. For the boys, there is also the possibility of going to war, training as a squire, carrying armor that weighs more than him, caring for the feudal lord's horse, and, with luck, dying crushed. Being an adolescent in the Middle Ages is having 50% chance of becoming a soldier and 50% chance of becoming a peasant. In any scenario, guaranteed back pain. And hormones? They exist, only nobody has patience for them. If the boy is rebellious, he gets a beating. If the girl is rebellious, she gets a scolding, extra prayer. And in extreme cases, she can even be accused of being possessed, because behavior outside the line is never seen as normal. It is always a sign of something greater, sin, spell, or curse. In the middle of this, you, mother, observe with a mix of pride and despair. Pride because your son grew up, didn't die early, is alive. Despair because you know the next step is even more dangerous, facing the adult world without a safety net. The village celebrates. After all, every new adult is one more part functioning in the great theater of survival. There is no diploma, there is no graduation party. The celebration is practical. Now you can already work double and complain half. You look at him or her and realize they still look like children. But in the eyes of the Middle Ages, they are not. In the eyes of the community, they have already turned into adults. Time was stolen. The future is already written. And you, tired, know, raising a child here isn't accompanying growth. It is merely delivering him to the world before his time. Your son grew up, and you still breathe deep without believing it. Because let's agree, just that is almost a statistical miracle. Now, he is officially part of the adult world, which means you no longer have a child. You have one more peasant, one more potential wife, one more piece in the gear that never stops. If he is a young man, he already carries a man's weight, works from sun to sun, and if luck is generous, manages to get a piece of land or enter a guild, which in practice means more work. Because in the Middle Ages there is no moving up in life, there is only changing the type of tiredness. If she is a young woman, it is likely she is already married. Maybe to a neighbor, maybe to someone you don't even know well. but who appeared with enough goats to convince your family. Marriage is not a choice, it is strategy. Love, that is an invention of troubadours. Reality is a hard mattress, birth after birth, and the same routine you already know well. And then comes the bitterest part. You realize that your child's life won't be different from yours. He repeats the same gestures, eats the same food, faces the same cold. Youth isn't about dreams, it is about continuity. If he is lucky, he survives long enough to repeat the cycle. Work, marry, have children, lose children, and follow on. And you, tired, watch this theater of repetitions. You see your son being charged by the same village that already charged you. You see him carry the same guilts, the same fears, the same pains. Nothing changes, because change is a rare thing in the Middle Ages. Time passes, but it passes in circles. And of course, death always lurks. Youth can be interrupted by war, by disease, by hunger. You fear every day, but nobody talks about it out loud, just follows. Because stopping is dangerous, questioning is dangerous, hoping for something better is useless. You look and feel pride. Yes, pride because he reached this point, because he didn't die early, because he exists. But pride always comes mixed with a bitter taste of resignation, because you know what lies ahead, and it has nothing new. In the end, raising a child in the Middle Ages isn't projecting a future. It is just ensuring he manages to repeat the past. A past full of mud, smoke, hunger and faith. And you sigh once more because you know the cycle has restarted. You survived. You are officially a walking miracle. Old age arrived in the Middle Ages, something as rare as fresh bread. And now the relationship with your son changes again. He is already an adult, already has his own routine, perhaps even his own children. And you, well, you became that tired lady in the corner of the house. In the beginning, they still help you. Your son respects, listens to you, even asks a thing or two about planting or cooking, but little by little patience runs out. After all, you walk slowly, speak slowly, breathe with a wheeze. And in a society where everything revolves around productivity, being old is almost being invisible. You become a practical burden. You eat more than you can produce, tire more than you can help, and still occupy space in the corner of the hut. Affection exists, but it is limited, because in the Middle Ages, affection doesn't fill a belly. Your now adult son looks at you with a mix of respect and worry. Respect because you survived. Worry because he knows that any day he might need a priest by your bedside, and nobody wants to waste candles for nothing. The village children, including your grandchildren, see you as a curiosity, a wrinkled old woman with missing teeth, who tells strange stories about times that seem identical to now, because they really are identical. You repeat things, mix memories, and they listen with that half-smile of someone who doesn't know if they believe or laugh. And then comes the cruelest side. Your own survival depends on the son's goodwill. There is no retirement, there is no savings, there is no social insurance. There is only the expectation that the family takes care of you. If they take care, you live a little longer. If they don't take care, well, you fade out, simple as that. In the middle of this, you realize how cruelly perfect the cycle is. You were once the tired mother caring for a sick baby. Now, you are the sick baby in the hands of the one who grew up under your gaze. And if before the village charged you, now it charges your son, because everyone judges how one cares for the child, but also how one cares for the elder. And between coughs, pains, and sleepless nights, you face the end with the same monotony as always, without great conclusions, without epiphanies, only the recognition that everything repeats. You look at your son now adult, full of responsibilities, and think, at least he made it here. He looks at you tired and thinks the same thing. And so medieval life goes on, without glamour, without a happy ending, only a straight line that ends where it always ends. You reach this point. Congratulations again, because being alive at this point in the Middle Ages is practically winning the lottery, but without a prize, without a party, without champagne, and with hip pain. Reaching old age is rare. Few people see white hairs appear, and when they appear, nobody thinks of experience or wisdom. They think, look there, one more mouth to feed. You are now the old woman or the old man of the village. The body no longer responds, hands tremble, legs have no firmness. And ironically, it is the first time you have free time. Only this free time isn't leisure, it is just waiting. Waiting for the next pain, for the next cough, for the next news of death, which could be yours or someone close. Your son, that baby you rocked fearing not seeing the next sunrise, is now an adult. He already repeats the same cycle. Works, gets tired, has children, loses children, prays, distrusts, repeats. You look at him and realize how nothing changed. You suffered, he suffers. You have calluses, he has calluses. You carried wood, now he carries wood. The wheel turns, but never leaves the place. And of course now you become dependent. Depend on the son who one day depended on you. Depend on his goodwill to share hard bread, to let you near the fire, to bring clean water when there is leftover. If he cares, you survive a little longer. If not, you dry up fast, like a candle forgotten in the wind. Social life that practically ended. Nobody expects you to contribute anymore. Nobody calls you for parties unless to sit as a piece of human decoration. You are a living reminder that everyone's future is the same. Everyone looks at you and thinks, if I have the bad luck to live long, I'll end up like that too. Zero comfort. And in the middle of this, you continue observing. You see your grandchildren running in the mud, repeating the same mistakes, getting the same scoldings. You see your daughters and daughters-in-law pregnant, feeling the same pains you felt. You see your sons and sons-in-law complaining of the harvest, of hunger, of the plague. It is the same theater, only the cast changes. Sometimes you even tell stories, but let's be honest, nobody has patience. They listen to you out of politeness or because they need distraction in the middle of monotony. You repeat things, get lost in the middle of the sentence, mix saint with legend and the kids laugh. For them, you are already kind of a folkloric figure, not a living library but a failing radio. And you feel the body fail more with each season. The cough doesn't pass, pains increase, the winter cold seems greater. The summer heat suffocates more. You notice signs that the end is coming, difficulty getting up, difficulty eating, difficulty even breathing. But there is no drama in this. Death in the Middle Ages isn't taboo, it is the next-door neighbor. It appears in all houses, at all ages. You just know that now it is your turn to open the door, and when death comes close, there is no doctor in a white coat, there is a priest. You call him or he is called for you. He comes, says a prayer, blesses, maybe gives a last communion, maybe wipes holy water on your forehead. That's it. There is no long farewell, no profound reflection, only rituals, because death needs to be organized so as not to scare more than it already scares. And the family, they stay around. Some cry, others already look to the future, calculating how it will be to divide tasks without you. In the Middle Ages, nobody has time for long grief. Bury quickly, pray quickly, and go back to work. Because the field doesn't wait, the cattle doesn't wait, hunger doesn't wait. Death is just a short pause in the flow of life. You remember when you were young and were afraid your baby wouldn't survive the night? Now you are the fragile, dependent baby surrounded by worried looks. The cycle repeats and repeats and repeats, always equal, always tiring. And deep down, you realize that raising a son in the Middle Ages wasn't about forming character, nor about giving opportunities. It was about guaranteeing that there was someone to continue working when you couldn't anymore, and when you can't anymore at all. Ready. Cycle concluded. The cruel irony. You spent your whole life trying to protect your son and now depend on him to survive. You sacrificed yourself and now the sacrifice needs to be returned. It is the math of medieval survival. Each generation feeds the previous one while preparing the next to repeat the same account. And you, tired, lying in your corner of straw, know there is no epic finale. There is no music, no applause, no light descending from the sky. Only the night arriving, as it always arrives. And you accept, because after all, you never had a choice. In the end, raising a son in the Middle Ages is like writing a letter you will never read. You deliver it to the future, and the future delivers it to death. And you close your eyes knowing that the only certainty is that the cycle doesn't end with you. It continues exactly the same in the life of who stayed. You no longer feel time in the same way. Every day in the Middle Ages was always the same, but now in old age it seems even more repetitive. Dawn breaks, the rooster crows, someone lights a fire, someone stirs the pot, someone complains of back pain. You smile from the corner because you realize it was always like this, since when you yourself were born, since when your son was born, and even after you depart. The cycle of medieval life isn't a straight line. It is a tight circle that turns, and never changes. You were born, grew, worked, suffered, gave birth, lost, cared, tired. Now you watch others repeat each step and realize that nothing you did was unique. Each mother, each father, each grandmother already lived the same script, only changing the names. And raising a son in the Middle Ages, you know well, was never about a brilliant future. It was surviving the present. The baby cried, you rocked. The child got sick, you prayed. The teenager rebelled, you cut it at the root. The adult went away, to work, marry, die in war or plague. And you stayed until you stayed no more. You remember every detail, even now that memory begins to fail. Remember the smell of sweat mixed with mold of the hut. Remember the hard straw you called a bed. Remember the midwife who said she had experience because she already helped the neighbor's goat give birth. Remember the night fever that seemed endless. Remember the repeated prayers without a clear answer. Remember every time fear disguised itself as routine, and yet you also remember the small victories. The baby's first step without falling, the first bucket carried without spilling, the first time your son managed to eat and there was still food left over. They are small things, but in the Middle Ages, small things are miracles. Now, with the body weak and the mind tired, you realize the irony. The effort was enormous, but the result is always the same. Raising a son was just ensuring someone occupied your place when you couldn't anymore. You didn't prepare him for the future, you prepared him to repeat the past. And you think, was it worth it? It was, because there was no alternative. Medieval life never gave a choice, never gave space for big dreams. Your son couldn't want to be an artist, explorer, or philosopher. He could want to survive, and that's it. And perhaps in that wanting so limited was already the greatest ambition possible, to wake up the next day. You close your eyes for an instant and hear the routine around, the voices, the noise of the wood, the spoon hitting the pot. The world continues with or without you. And this is the point. The world doesn't stop. It never stopped. You only took part for a time. Now it is time to leave slowly, without ceremony. Your son continues, your grandchildren continue, the cycle continues, and many years from now, someone might remember your name, or maybe not, because in the Middle Ages, memory is also a luxury. Most lives disappear into forgetfulness, as if they never existed. You existed in your way, in the mud, in the pain, in the tiredness, and while the body weighs more, you understand the final lesson. Having a child in the Middle Ages was trauma. Yes, it was fear, yes. But it was also the only way to exist beyond yourself. It was guaranteeing that your fight didn't end alone, even if it was just for another person to fight in the same manner. You breathe deep, feel the cold rise through the bones, and for the first time in a long time, feel neither haste nor fear, only a heavy silence. The same silence that accompanied all the mothers and fathers before you, the same that will accompany your children after. You close your eyes and everything goes quiet. Because in the Middle Ages, life never ends in an explosion. It ends in a whisper, ends in the void, ends without drama, without spectacle, only the tired body that finally stops. And before fading out, you think, at least now, there is no more childbirth, nor hunger, nor plague, nor fear, only rest. Finally, good night, tired listener, and until next time, sleep with a boring story.